Welcome to the Get in the Fight podcast. My name is Nate Whitson, and I'm the founder of Get in the Fight Ministries and our exclusive online fight club for Christian men. Everything we do here is dedicated to helping Christian men become the men that God meant for them to be. So if you're looking for helpful content and conversations that can help you to grow and become the man that God made you to be, then you're in the right place. But before we get started, please do me a huge favor and be sure to subscribe, click the like button, and then leave us a 5-star review. Doing that helps us to reach more men who are looking for content just like this. Also, if you'd like to learn more about our mission and how to get involved or how to join the Fight Club, then head on over to getinthefight.club. That's getinthefight.club and learn more today. But without further ado, it's time to get in the fight. So let's go. Hey guys, welcome to the Get in the Fight podcast. I'm your host, Nate Whitson. Thanks for being with me today. Thanks for listening to the show. Do me a big favor. I know the intro kind of talks about this. I say this all the time, but as we grow this brand, it's really, really critical to us that you not only listen, but that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and that you share it with a friend. Just doing those two things helps us to get this message to so many more men. Appreciate you listening, appreciate you subscribing and sharing it with a buddy. If today's conversation is one that you feel like warrants those two things, maybe listen to the end. And if it is, then subscribe, maybe share it to somebody that might be hurting or dealing with today's topic. That would mean a lot to us and maybe mean a lot to them as well. So again, thanks for being here. Today, I want to talk about a topic that I was surprised by a little bit. I feel very grateful that today's conversation isn't one that I deal with. And maybe that's why it surprised me, to be honest with you, that I didn't realize how much of an issue a sexless marriage really is for so many people. When I started to investigate this and look at this a little bit, I was surprised to see that it's one of the most commonly searched topics in all of the internet. I mean, you think about the endless searches that are out there. Many people, both men and women alike, are commonly searching for help, searching for solutions, searching for answers on what do I do if I'm in a sexless marriage. And so I want to address that today. Number one, with a lot of compassion. If you are dealing with this, if you're somebody who's wrestling with this issue, I just want to say, man, I am, I'm hurt for you. I know that this is something that you're dealing with that's painful. It's embarrassing. It's probably not something that you want to talk about a whole lot. Probably not very many people know about this, quite possibly. And I just want you to know, again, I'm not an expert. I don't want to come across as I've got this figured out. I do work as a certified sexual addiction recovery professional. And that's not my full-time job, but it's what I do as part of this ministry here for Get in the Fight for Christian men. And I deal with the topic of sex a lot in terms of dysfunction, pornography, unwanted sexual behaviors, things like that. And so things like talking about sex comes up quite a bit in conversations that I have. And it's certainly something that I want to address in the full capacity of marriage, Christian marriage. And how do we help solve some of these things? How do we address some of these issues? And so as I become more aware of these topics, I want to search them out. I want to figure out how do we help men, Christian men in particular, to deal with these different things. And so today, as a non-expert, as a person who really even just can't from firsthand experience relate with this, I still want to take on this topic. I still want to offer some help. I want to offer some ideas because my heart just goes out to you. Again, if you're dealing with this story and you're just man, I don't know where to turn to. And I especially don't know where to turn to as a believer. How do I deal with this issue? Then I hope to just offer some thoughts. How about that? Thoughts and then genuinely just prayers for you. That this would maybe open some doors in your marriage, open some doors in your heart, maybe open some doors that you haven't thought of in your thinking about this. And so just to kind of share with you where I want to go, I'm just going to share with you, 4 possible reasons that in my research I could come up with that, why this could be the case, why this could be happening. And then I want to just kind of give a quick look at least just one specific biblical reference about things that we should be thinking about when we think biblically about a sexless marriage. And then I want to give you some really practical questions that you can wrestle with, yourself. I think there's some introspective questions that we need to ask. And then there's also some questions that we need to have out loud with our wives as well. And so again, just hope to take this on if this is you today, or maybe it's just somebody that you know of. Again, subscribe, share this, or maybe just embrace some of these thoughts, pray through some of these things, and hopefully they lead you to hope. That's my real hope for you today. So to define the term, I was kind of assuming something here, and maybe some of you are too who are listening, that maybe this isn't your story either. I assumed quite literally that a sexless marriage meant just that there was no sex happening. But in defining the terms, what came out to me in my study was that it's really more like defined loosely based on, your own definitions in a lot of ways. But in most cases, you're having sex less than one time a month. But in a lot of cases, what you find is that somebody's defining themselves as being in a sexless marriage because they're simply unsatisfied with the frequency or the amount of sex that they're having in their marriage. And most importantly to it all, they're hurt by it, right? The amount of connection and intimacy that they're having is less than desired, and they feel hurt because of this, right? So again, as I wrestle through with some of these things, my hope and prayer for you is that God is going to just open the door to healing and then also to a healthier sex life. And I just want to pause here and just say that, as of the recording of this is at the end of 2024. My first book is coming out either at the end of this year or sometime early next year, hopefully, called Let's Talk About Sex, 20 things that Christian husbands and wives wish their spouse knew or would do, but don't know how to tell you. I say that, of course, I think you should go buy the book, but just to kind of tell you in some reference into why I'm taking this on here, I believe that Christian marriages ought to reflect the beauty of what God had in mind for marriage and for human flourishing. And that certainly includes a thriving and beautiful sex life. And what I find out in just my own personal studies and just life itself too, I've been married for 20 years happily, it's a tricky conversation. It's hard for people to talk about sex just as Christians in general. We struggle to talk about it. It's always kind of been this taboo topic that people don't want to take on, but it's really hard for some reason to talk about sex with your spouse. And so in today's podcast, and certainly in the book too, Let's Talk About Sex, I want to help arm you with really practical things that I think could help, right? This is a work of God in your marriage. This is something that he has to do to bring healing from the heart level. And so this isn't going to be like, oh, wow, that podcast changed my life. No, only Christ can do that. But we have to move. We have to change our thinking. We have to position ourselves to allow that to happen. And I think that just thinking through some of these things here, these possible reasons that we'll look at here, understanding how to think biblically about this, and then really having practical tools like the book, Let's Talk About Sex, or like the things that we'll talk about here today, can be life-changing. And again, that's my hope for you today. So the lack of sex in a man's life feels profoundly painful. And I think the reason for that, in my simple brain, is that there are some core questions of a heart at the heart level that men wrestle with. And again, like I'm very influenced by John Eldredge. And so, these things won't surprise you if you're a fan of John's as well. But some of these core questions are, am I enough? And do I have what it takes? Am I man enough to do what it takes to win the girl, to win the fight, to do the hard things? And so when a man feels emasculated and his sex life is painful and hurtful to him at the heart level, it wounds a man in deep ways. It's very shameful. There's a lot of guilt potentially with it, right? Like the hurt is deep. And so one of the things, if you're a woman listening to this, that I want you just to feel and to understand is that a Christian man is trying to, if he's a good man, if he's a godly man, he is wrestling through core questions of, is he enough? And then how do I be faithful to God when I don't feel like that is being answered in my love life, right? Now, again, we all know, like, I think at a base level that we shouldn't try to make our marriage or our sex life take the place of what God alone can do. And yet, let's be honest, like, even though that's true, this relationship was intended to be this beautiful thing where these complementary roles and people come together in a beautiful way to represent this mystery of who God is and his deep love for us. And so there is something very core that is missing in a sexless marriage that really hurts a man. And so we need to address this. We need to figure out ways to try to help move this along into the picture that God has for marriage, right? I also know this, by the way, that I know of relationships, conversations that I've had where many times, probably most times, it seems like the wife is the one that's withholding, or the wife is the one who's been hurt, or it's coming from like the wife is not, the wife is withholding, I guess. But there are also times and stories that I know of specifically too, where it's the guy for some reason. The guy is the one that's withholding, and the wives are immensely hurt and frustrated and just deeply wounded as well. And so it isn't always a one-sided issue. I think it tends to be maybe where women get hurt and they withhold, or there's different things going on there, but it certainly goes both ways. And so as we think through these 4 possible reasons here, I just want to give 4 reasons that stood out to me in my study of this that I think might just give us at least some background to go like, okay, there's more going on than just somebody doesn't want to have sex with their spouse. There's 4 possible reasons. The first one was just emotional or relational reasons could be in the way. So again, this is a podcast for Christian men, so I'm going to mostly be talking to you in terms of, the husband or the man side of this. But a lot of times what happens emotionally is that men don't realize that your wife's brain is her biggest sex organ. And that kind of is like, no, I don't think that's true. Physiologically, that's not true. Well, maybe physiologically it is. When a woman feels out of whack emotionally because her man isn't emotionally connected to her, she does not just throw herself at that man. She is not going to just, be open and responsive sexually to her husband if things are emotionally not satisfying to her, right? If her emotional needs are not being met. And so this looks like, where the husband, isn't loving his wife emotionally, but he wants her to respond to him at the drop of a hat when he's ready to have sex. Well, that emotional wounding and that relational issue absolutely could cause a lady to just kind of step back and be like, no, I don't want to give that to you because you're not even trying to meet me where my emotional needs are, but you want me to meet you where your physical needs are. That feels like dirty, right? That feels wrong. When a husband is not responsive to his wife, he comes home, he's, unengaged, he runs out to the barn or he goes to his hobbies or goes golfs, but he wants to come home and then get romantic with his wife again, like emotionally, relationally, she may not be into that. And it could lead to this sexless marriage when he doesn't serve her, unless he is pretty obviously thinking it's going to lead to sex. That feels like abusive and hurtful to a woman, right? If he doesn't talk kind to her, if he doesn't flirt with her, if he doesn't recognize what her love language is and then try to meet that need, again, it feels like it's then, just this transaction of like, you owe this to me, but I don't owe you anything emotionally. It can lead to be one of those reasons why I think men find themselves in a sexless marriage. The emotional needs are not being met. The relationship is hurt in some way. Number 2 is just biologically things change, right? Sometimes I think men and women both deal with things biologically, especially as we get older. And oftentimes it's hormone related. Things just change. Things just are different as we age, right? In this case, I think a lot of people could be in a relationship where like they're struggling and their sex life is like non-existent almost. And they look at each other like, I don't know why, right? If you're in a relationship where you're like, everything seems to be doing good and, we're just not feeling it in terms of our sex life, we're just not sure what's going on. What I would suggest to you is that it could be a biological reason, right? If you're in a pretty good relationship, things are pretty good or great even, but there's just no passion, there's no sex energy, or there's, right? Like there's no, interest in that for some reason. What I would tell you is that both of you, husband and wife potentially, should go talk to a doctor and have your hormones checked. And again, I'm not saying that facetiously at all. I think genuinely a man ought to go check those levels out and find out like part of the reason why you may be in a sexless marriage is because you're just not feeling it. And with some help, you might be able to resolve some of those issues. Same thing with your wife. If it's the wife, she's just like, man, I love you like crazy. And I wish I could feel this way and everything is good. There's no secrets. There's nothing else going on, but I just don't know what it is. I'm telling you, biologically speaking, it could be one of the reasons that you're having an issue. So definitely go see a doctor and get that checked out. That could be one of the reasons. Number 3, I said was psychological. There could be a psychological reason that you are in a sexless marriage. Past abuse that you've just never really dealt with, past pain in relationships with family members or just abuse that's happened, trauma that you've been through, right? Any of those kinds of things, if left unchecked, could absolutely lead to feelings of not wanting to engage in sex, and you don't even know why. And for a lot of guys, we don't do very good at like checking under the hood to our, the emotional temperature of our heart. We're not trained very well to think about like, man, how am I feeling today? We kind of have like historically just pushed off feelings, right? Or we'll say like, you know what, like I was abused as a kid, but that doesn't affect me today. But I don't know why I'm in a sexless marriage and I can't figure out how to connect the dots, right? Past abuse, pain, trauma, all those things can be a huge issue, right? A lot of women who have had issues with their father. Think about this. Are you in a relationship where you are married to a woman who grew up with like a bitterness towards her dad? If so, psychological reasons could be at play here because she simply doesn't know how to respond to her husband any different than how she feels about her dad. And it could be causing a dilemma in your sex life here, right? And counseling could be huge for this. Counseling, biblical counseling in particular, can really be important for one or both of you to really get down to like the psychology of this, like what is happening that is left unchecked that could be leading to this. That could be a huge, maybe, not trigger, but huge opportunity for you to think through like what's happening here, right? It isn't just a matter of we don't want to have sex. There's something else at play here. Maybe it's psychological. Number 4, I mentioned this as a sexual addiction recovery professional. Pornography is a big issue. And so number 4 is just, pornography could be the reason. There are just so many stories where marriages are sexless today because one or both of them are engaging in pornography or sexual fantasy or some other kind of, negative sexual experience outside of their marriage, and it's impacting their real life, right? Sex addiction and behavioral addiction is a very real thing. And there are counselors and again, programs like mine, like if you go to getinthefight.club, you can see, you'll see it all over the website there. There's a program that I created called Quit Porn for Good. And we deal with some of these issues that have led to, potentially where you're at today. Things like if you don't deal with pornography, the ways that it impacts your brain, the ways that it impacts your real life, because you've lived so long in this fantasy life, they're very real issues. And so again, you can check that out if this is an issue that you're dealing with. Pornography has a major impact in sexless marriages today. So emotional reasons or relational reasons are out of whack. Maybe it's biological reasons. Maybe it's psychological reasons. Maybe it's pornography. Maybe it's a combination, right? There's at least 4 options there for you to kind of just start praying through. God, what is it? Reveal to me, show me what it is here so that we can find solutions and help here. But, the Bible does speak about this. And again, like we need to learn to think biblically. What does the Bible say about a sexless marriage? Well, I don't know if it says a whole lot, very much more clearly than this one here. 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5 says this: the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. Do not deprive each other, except perhaps by mutual consent and for a time, so that you can devote yourselves to prayer. Then come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Man, that is pretty clear to me. Again, 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5. Open your Bible and read through that. Here's a couple things I wrote down that I think just stand out. The first thing here in verse 3, the husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and then likewise for wives. There is a certain part of this that is just simply duty. Now, having duty sex is not fun. It's not good. It's transactional.
There's no heart. It's not the goal. But there is a portion of this conversation, a part of this, I want to say, that really is duty and obligation. Like we're obligated to understand that men need sex, women need sex. Like we need what God created this for, to bring us together for wholeness and for health, right? There is a duty that comes to say, like, look, you don't, verse 4, have authority over yourself. You can't just say, like, look, my body, my rights, you have no rights here. That's what the world screams to us every day. The Bible screams something else. Your body is not your own. You became one when you married this woman, when she married you. And so there is a duty in creating oneness and connecting yourselves together where you yield to one another, right? Like we talk about in the book, Let's Talk About Sex, that one of the key issues here is that, like, you're going to have potentially different sex drives. Guess what? You married a complementary opposite person than you. One of you may be just, very on fire when it comes to sex, and the other could be very cold. The reality is that neither of you has authority to demand it or to withhold it, right? Each of you ought to yield to one another, to consider one another as more important than yourselves, and in love to fulfill the mission of Christ through that marriage. That marriage is a picture of the mystery of the inner workings of the Trinity, the deep love and respect and honoring and yielding to one another, right? Like there's a mystery involved in this beautiful thing. And when you have a sexless marriage, you are not living to the fullness of what's happening here. And again, there could be lots of reasons for it, and even some that maybe aren't listed here. So again, just know, like, if your story is just different than all of these, I'm not trying to be a know-it-all or point fingers. I'm just trying to give help in general to those who might be struggling here. If your story is just different, man, my heart goes out to you, and I want to just see you find hope and healing in Christ there, right? But I want us just in general to know that if this is an issue in your marriage, that God has a picture of what this could be, and you probably are already on board with that. You're probably like, yes, and I want that, and I don't know what to do about it. Well, it starts with understanding, again, those 4 reasons. Maybe it starts there, but then we want to build into it biblical thinking. What does God say about this? He says, don't deprive each other except by mutual consent, and that only for a time. Having a sexless marriage for a period of time could absolutely be the most appropriate thing in your marriage. How do you know? When it's mutually agreed upon and it's only for a time. So, like, for example, in the Quit Porn for Good program, one of the parts that we work through is that when a man has to disclose this secret life that he's been living, one of the consequences, and sometimes a necessary consequence in some marriages, not all, is that they might need to have a season of not having sex in order to restore and to rebuild trust and connection and healing first. But the goal is to find that restoration, not to stay in that long term. So what we learn here in 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5, is that you don't deprive each other long term with a sexless marriage, where one of you is saying that I'm hurt by this. Like, man, we have sex, but it's like once a quarter, once a year, once a month, whatever that is. If somebody's hurt by it, we come back to what the Bible says about this and says, look, there is a duty that we owe to one another, to love one another, to sacrifice for one another, to give ourselves for the benefit of one another, in this beautiful picture of how Christ has done that and served us in that same way. When we weren't deserving, he still came and he gave everything, right? A marriage is a picture of this beautiful picture where we give sacrificially and lovingly for the benefit of the other over ourselves. And when you have 2 people doing that, right? One with a high sex drive, one with a low sex drive, but they mutually work well together to serve and love one another, even if it's not how they feel all the time. Man, you've got this beautiful picture of Christ and his church. So go to the scriptures here and look at this. If this is a story that you're dealing with, really think through, memorize even that passage, 1 Corinthians 7, 3-5, think through that, talk through that together, figure out where can you yield to one another? Where can you just say, you know what? I don't get to control this, and I've been controlling this maybe in some ways, and I want to submit to Christ, and I want to submit to you and to our marriage. And then through prayer and devotion to one another, you come together again, so that Satan doesn't tempt you. Now, what is he tempting you with? He's tempting you with making this all about you. He's tempting you potentially with not trusting God in this situation. He's tempting you to abandon your faith and make it all about you, or, to become self-absorbed or whatever, like endless amount of options he might tempt you with. But through prayer and devotion to Christ and prayer and devotion to one another, you can come back together and find healing in this area. That is really what we're praying for here, right? So what do we need to do in all of these things? What's really like the most basic part of marriage that we all need to get better at, that we all need to deal with? Communication, right? How do you get to restoration of a sexless marriage? How do you find healing if this is your story? It starts and ends with communication, learning to talk about sex more openly and honestly with one another. And again, this podcast is an attempt, a humble attempt to help you to deal with that. But I also just encourage you, go get the book, Let's Talk About Sex, 20 Things Christian Husbands and Wives Wish Their Spouse Knew or Would Do, but don't know how to tell you. We don't know how to talk very good about these things together. We don't know how to like create the space for it. And if we did have the space for it and somebody's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? We're like, I don't know. I don't even know what to say, right? Maybe some of you resonate with that. If so, that book and some of these questions that I'm about to get into with you here, I think can really, really help. So we know we need to communicate better. What I would suggest, one potential idea, is that, again, if you're a man, or even I guess if you're a woman listening to this story today, that you approach your spouse and just say, hey, listen, I've been listening to this podcast called Get in the Fight. We're talking about some things that I think we're dealing with in our own marriage here. And man, I'm praying for us. I want more for us, right? However you're going to say this, use your own words, but approach your spouse, and again, talking mostly to Christian men, I assume, approach your wife and just say to her, like, I want us to fix this. I want us to get better. I want us to understand each other more. I want us to learn to communicate better about this. And if you're willing, I would love for us to just ask ourselves some of these questions that I heard on this podcast that I think could help. That might be just enough. And if you're married to a good-willed woman, she probably is upset by some of this stuff too, right? Like there's disconnect, there's tension, you want to deal with it. You both do. So approach her with prayer, after much prayer, and just say, listen, when you're ready, I would love to talk to you. I've got some questions. I can give you the questions up front if you'd rather, or we can just print it off and just talk through it. But man, I would love to, carve out some time for that. Would you be willing to do that? Hopefully she is. And assuming she is, there's some things that we can do here. And by the way, I'll say this at the end, but if you want a copy of these questions that I'm about to cover with you, email me, Nate, N-A-T-E, Nate at getinthefight.club, Nate at getinthefight.club, and just request it. Say, hey, will you send me those questions from the Sexless Marriage podcast? I would love to have those, and I'll happily send those to you. Okay, but first things first, all right. Questions have to start introspectively. You have to start with you, okay? So the first set of questions I wrote down here are this. Number one, have I been emotionally present and supportive in recent months? Like, this is really good for you to be really honest about. Is your marriage sexless in this moment, and you're part of it or a lot of it because you really have been emotionally distant? That's an important question to be honest about. Have you been supportive? Have you been, doing the things emotionally to help around the house, to help with the kids, to flirt with her, to be kind to her, to hold her hand, to do all the things emotionally that your wife needs? How have you been doing in that? Number two, am I holding on to any unresolved bitterness or anger or resentment, and it's getting in the way? If you have something that's unresolved within your own heart, she may not even know it, right? You might be dealing with a bitterness, maybe not even towards her, but maybe it's just like it's causing you emotionally to be so out of whack that she's bearing the brunt of it because of something at work or something in your family story or whatever it might be. I don't know. Is there anything underneath the hood of your heart and mind that's in the way? Any angerness, any bitterness, any resentment? Number three, I said, how is my walk with Christ? Is your walk with Jesus legit right now? Is there anything that's blocking and hindering your relationship with him that might be worth investigating because it's leading to some issues here in your marriage? How is your relationship with God? How are you doing spiritually in the moment? Sin can absolutely impact your relationship in ways that could lead to a sexless marriage. Number 4, I just said, am I prioritizing my marriage? Think about this, like, where does the majority of your time and money and efforts and, energies towards, just having fun or whatever it is, like, how are you doing there? Like, is your marriage a priority? I know for us, like financially even, we made a commitment a long time ago before money was, slightly easier than it is today, that no matter what, we were going to put aside something, even if it was just enough to have an ice cream cone, that we could have a date every month where we could just kind of go get away and do some stuff, right? We prioritize that in our budget with our spending, and we still do that today. And so, just ask yourself, how are you doing in making your marriage the priority that it needs to be? Number 5, is there shame or guilt, depression, anxiety, or, any of those kinds of negative emotions that you're dealing with? You got guilt over, again, pornography, secret fantasy life? Is there a relationship at work that's not appropriate and it's causing you to have feelings somewhere where they should not be, and it's leading to your marriage where you just don't feel that for your wife now? Are you dealing with depression and your wife maybe knows it, but you haven't been clear about it or asking for help? Is there anxiety about something, again, at work or in your life or, with your health or something like that, that you're keeping to yourself? These things can absolutely manifest themselves in, sexual dysfunction and crazy, and can lead to some of this. So are you dealing with any of that? Good question for introspective analysis there. And then number 6, last one, is just, am I taking care of myself? Like, we talk about this a lot in our fight club, which again, you should check out if you're a Christian man. getinthefight.club/join. You can click the join buttons. It's free. You should totally join. It's awesome. But one of the things we talk about fairly regularly is just like the impact that your physical life has on your spiritual life and has on your emotional life. And then certainly in this case could have on your sex life. If you are out of shape physically and you're just exhausted all the time, you're drinking energy drinks, you're smoking, you're drinking, or you're just unfit and lazy, and you are going like, I just don't know why I don't feel it anymore. Dude, you're not taking care of yourself. You're not going to be in a great position to have an amazing sex life if you are emotionally, physically, spiritually broken, right? Check yourself. Do you need to just get in shape? Do you need to check your testosterone levels biologically? We talked about that. Do you just need to put down the sugar, put down the food, start walking? What if you started walking with your wife, held her hand and just started talking? Like, all these kinds of things, right? Again, email me, Nate@getinthefight.club. I'm happy to send you these questions, but it starts with you answering some questions about you first. Think through that. I'm dealing with the sexless marriage. Is some of that because of these 6 questions that I really need to be honest with myself? Now the questions that you ask with your spouse. Questions that after you've dealt with you, after you've dealt with the biblical perspective, after you've wrestled through those 4 potential reasons, how about some of these questions that you could ask together? Number 1, how do you feel about our relationship today? That's like a kind of a safe softball little way to approach this. But most likely, you both know something's off at least, right? Maybe it's way worse than that. But it opens up and at least lets that person start at the base level. Like, how do you feel about where we're at? Number 2, is there something that I can do that would make you feel more loved and appreciated by me? Really cool, simple question. But man, it's going to open up the focus where it needs to be, where that person's going to explain, your wife's going to explain her emotional needs. You're like, man, I just don't feel like you care. I don't feel like you help, whatever she might answer. Listen closely and then do those things. What can I do to help you to feel more loved and appreciated? Number 3, have there been any changes in your health or your stress that maybe I'm not aware of? Maybe this is that chance where one of you or both of you get to say like, man, there's something going on at work that I haven't told you because I don't want you to carry the stress of this, but this has really got me down. Or man, like there's something happening to me physically that I feel like I can't get it up, or I'm struggling to feel a certain way. I don't know what's going on with me, but it's embarrassing and I haven't known how to express it to you, right? If there's something that's going on in you that your spouse doesn't know, she's probably taking that really personally. Like, man, he must be thinking of other women. He must be not loving me anymore, or whatever. The case just might be there's some changes in you that you or she doesn't know how to express and talk about yet. And having a simple list like this or the book, Let's Talk About Sex, can, I'm telling you, be life changing. Number 4, what would you like more from me emotionally? Now, again, like we're talking about this a lot because men need more help dealing with how to express emotions, how to even think that emotions come into play. For us, sex is very much like, oh, you want to have sex? Cool, let's go do that. I'm ready. For most of us, that's not true for everybody. It isn't like we feel emotionally stronger and more connected when we have sex. A woman wants to have more sex when she feels more emotionally connected. And for most men, we've heard that, but we just don't get it, right? So when you ask the question, what would you like more from me emotionally? What you might trigger in her or unlock in her is a desire to have more sex that you're not having enough of yet in your sexless marriage. Make sure you are like deeply connected and in tune with what she is asking more from you emotionally. Number 5, is there anything that has hurt you in the past that we need to address? Maybe it's from me or maybe it's from somebody else. This is like a really good chance where, you get to, number 1, own some of this if it is on you, but you also might just really deeply bond and connect with her by opening up this question and saying, look, if there's hurts here, I want to be a part of walking with you. Maybe I'm not going to solve all your problems, but I'm with you. I love you. I care about you. I want to know, like, is there some hurt there that we need to address? Number 6, can we improve our communication more so that we can both feel more understood? How can we do that? How can we improve our communication? It matters to me. I want to be able to talk about sex with you. I want to be able to talk about anything with you. I want to just be able to talk to you like a friend. How do we do that? What a cool way to just ask the question directly. It matters to me. How can we get better? Right? Number 7, what do you need? Or what would you like more from me spiritually? This is a really great question for a man to ask his woman because you are to be the leader of the home, men. This is our job. And so she might just say, man, we don't ever pray together, or we don't ever talk about spiritual things, or I would love it if we just did a devotion together, or whatever she might answer. What do you need, or what would you like to see more from me spiritually? Maybe she's going to say, like, I'd like to see you lead, a Bible study with me, or well, I don't know, help with the kids more, to talk about the Bible with them, whatever it might be. Listen carefully, because again, this spiritual connection and this emotional connection are things that your wife is most likely, not everybody, but most likely to respond and reciprocate in a sexual way, because when she emotionally and spiritually is connected to you, she is much more likely in general to want to open herself up to you sexually. Maybe some of these are the things that she's been holding grudges, wishing that you would just take the lead as a man and start leading spiritually and start acting like a man and loving her like you did when you dated and doing those things again. And if you will, maybe this unlocks some of this issue in your sexless marriage. How about number 8? How do you feel about how we handle conflict? How do we get better at that? If you have hurt your wife because of the way that you handle conflict, there's a really good chance, and by the way, this could be, again, always go back and forth. This could be the wife doing this. This could be you doing this, however this works. But having this conversation about how you handle conflict could be a big, big deal. It could be a catalyst to change and to, just address some of the hurts and the things that have happened in your life where you're just like, man, how we handle conflict just shuts me down to you emotionally and sexually in a big way. And so how do we get better at that, right? That's a great question. Number 9, how do you feel about our current sex life? That's a great question, right? If she says, I don't know, I'm just not feeling it, maybe you go back to one of those first 4 things we talked about. Maybe it's an emotional reason. Let's talk about that. Maybe it's biological. Like, hey, would you be willing to just go and have a doctor do blood work and check your hormone levels? Maybe it's just something that's off there. Would you be willing to at least investigate that? Maybe it's, some kind of, psychological reason. Maybe she's dealing again with some past hurt or trauma or pain or something between you and your relationship that hasn't been dealt with. Or maybe it's pornography, right? Maybe she's not sure, but she suspects you are, right? Or vice versa. Or maybe she has been, or maybe she's reading fantasy novels and, it's psychologically breaking her down, whatever it is, right? How do you feel about our current sex life can lead to going like, let's investigate where it can be, let's investigate how we want it to be. Let's talk about what would make this like the best sex life in the world? What would it take for us to have the kind of sex life that other people would be so envious of, but we live it out in real life? How cool would that be if we had it like that? What would it take for you? What would it take for me? Those are conversations that, again, most of us just don't know how to have with our spouse, and we should. Last one, number 10, what would it look like for us to take steps towards healing our sexual intimacy? If you're dealing in a sexless marriage, just saying, I'm here. I want this to get better. I don't want to be stuck here. If you don't want to be stuck here, what can we do? Like, let's work on this together. Let's be in this together. And then you pray. And then you pray. And then you hold your wife's hand, right? You sit face to face, or you stand with her, you hold her hands, whatever it is, you hug her while you're praying, but you pray together and you say, like, God, would you help us? Would you fix us? Would you change us? Would you give us what we need? Because we want to better emulate you in the world, for our kids, for our friends' sake, but God, for our own hearts and for our own minds and for our own testimony of who you are in this world. God, would you help us to fix the sexless marriage, right? These things I think could help, right? In summary, as we wrap this up, like, a sexless marriage is where somebody is feeling hurt because of the lack of frequency that they wish they had. And for a man, this is just like, again, this is a hard pill for us to swallow, because this internal deep questioning in our soul is like, do I have what it takes? Am I man enough? And if you don't have this in your life, if you are in a sexless marriage, it really can rattle the core of those questions that we wrestle with and sometimes struggle to figure out, how to answer, right? Is the reason for where we're at emotional? Is it biological? Is it psychological? Or is it porn related? Think through those 4 things. Could it be one of those things? And then go deeper into that. What do you need to do? How do you need to address it? How do you find help, right? Maybe it's a doctor. Maybe it's a counselor. Maybe it's just better communication, right? Communication and learning to talk about sex, just like the book name, just like this podcast is about, is really so, so critical. You have to learn to get past any awkwardness, any hard feelings, and come at these conversations with honesty. And again, I hope that these are practical ways that you can just learn to talk about these important things. It starts, though, with you really kind of being honest with yourself. You start with you. You take ownership of you. You look at yourself really closely and answer those questions that you ask about yourself, about your emotional state, your spiritual state, all of these kinds of things. And then you get to the point where you sit down with your spouse and you figure out a way to say, hey, can we just get away for a couple hours somewhere private and just talk about this? Like, man, I love you and I want to fix this. I want to get better. How can we do this? Right? By the way, if you get to the point where you're just stuck, none of this works, none of this is helping, you've got to go get help, right? You've got to get with a counselor. You've got to find a professional. If this has been going on so long and you feel like, yeah, I hear this, but she says no to all of it, you got to find help, right? Leaving isn't the answer. Shutting down isn't the answer. You've got to find a way, even if it's just you going to professional help, that you go to a professional to get help, right? That is not a mark of, weakness, or, it's not a bad mark against you as a man, right? It actually takes real courage and real bravery and real manhood to go say, something's broken here and I want to fix it. I need help. We need help, and go search for that help, right? For many of you, maybe you're not quite at that all the way broken spot. And if you're in a marriage where you just think there's still hope, that you still have some communication, that you still just are trying to wrestle through these things, if that's you, then this is what it means to get in the fight. Just like the name of our ministry, the name of this podcast, to get in the fight for your wife, to get in the fight for your marriage, to get in the fight for your heart, to get in the fight for your sexual life, and just your connection with your wife. To get in the fight means to do the hard work of learning how to figure out, like, is it one of these 4 reasons? And if so, what do I do with that? Am I biblically minded here? Is there anything that we need to do to get back in line, to get in the fight with the way that God has ordained this and led us to this place? How do we get in line with him? And then how do we do the hard work of praying with and for our marriage and with our wife? This is so, so critical, right? This is what it looks like to get into the fight. And that's my prayer for you. Get in the fight. This is the path to fixing and healing a sexless marriage.
Hey guys, thanks so much for being here today and listening to the show. Please be sure to head over to the website at getinthefight.club. And before you go, if you haven't already, please subscribe, click the like button, and leave us a positive 5-star review. It makes a huge difference whenever you do. Have a great day. Go get in the fight.